I'm going to talk to you today about virtual reality technology. So over at the kiosk over there, we have an example, and you're very welcome to go over afterwards and try it for yourselves. I'm a psychologist, and I'm really here to tell you today why I think this technology can help us as a community to take performance to the next level. So I make no apologies for presenting a little bit of the science. That's what I'm here for, and why I've done this research. So the particular area of performance I'm interested in is really about how our brains make these decisions about action. And by that I mean what you do, when you do it, and how you do it. But to understand decision making, you have to start with understanding where we get the information to make those decisions. And it all starts with our senses. So it starts with, of course, our eyes, but also our ears, and also, very importantly, our sense of touch. We all have like a sixth sense, which is really our proprioception, which is really knowing where our body is positioned in space. And these senses give us that link, and our eyes are probably the most important place where the information starts. But it's through our interaction with the environment that we generate information, or what we call optic flow. So as we move around our environment, the patterning of information on the back of our eyes and in our brain actually changes. And that's the really important information that we need to guide our movements and make decisions. So what we see, our perception, and what we do, our action, are all inextricably linked. So we move to perceive and perceive to move. So we can't have one really without the other. So if we're using a technology to help understand and maybe improve performance, it's important we understand this perception-action cycle, or the perception-action loop between the two. Mundane tasks like driving a car, crossing a road, are all examples where we have to constantly pick up information that tells us something about the current future. And for me, the current future are those next 2-3 seconds in our life. We don't need to know any further than that. It's just the next 2-3 seconds, that temporal bubble within which we operate and make decisions that can help us act ahead of time. And this is a concept we call perspective control. So it's that ability to get to the right place at the right time to make, for example, a save if you're a goalkeeper. So within Incisive and within my work, what we're really trying to develop is this concept of action intelligence, where really it's that ability to make the right decision at the right time, but very importantly, execute it in the right way. Sometimes people say good decision, poor execution. For me, decision making, and actually it's the execution piece as well. So if we're going to study this, we have to think about the technology. And the particular type of example I'm going to talk about today is really decision making for goalkeepers. I must admit, I feel sorry for goalkeepers. Goalkeepers can make one mistake in a game and it can cost their team the game. Outfield players, strikers, defenders can make mistakes all day long, but they're not penalised as much as the poor goalkeepers. And my interest in goalkeeping all started from this. Over 20 years ago, this ridiculous free kick by Roberto Carlos. So everybody was marvelling at this kick. They were saying, oh, it's physically impossible. He didn't mean to do it. He struck the ball. The point was he did manage to kick a ball like that. And the point was we had Barthez here trying to make that save. And what interested me was Barthez didn't move. But also, if you look to the right of the goal over here, there's a ball boy that moves to the right. Everybody seemed to think that ball was going wide. Why did they think that ball was going wide? What was it about the information patterning that specified a ball that was going wide? So for me to actually start to study this as a psychologist, I was going to have to be able to manipulate and change the level of spin on the ball. So I needed a technology that would replicate the space-time pressures that a goalkeeper's under when they have to make those decisions, but also recreate the player's viewpoint. So I started off and I thought maybe I could use video. So I contacted Sky Sports and they gave me some video footage. And then I suddenly realized every kick's different, the viewpoint's different. That isn't the information the goalkeeper had available to them when they had to make that decision. Which direction do I move and how do I move? So this example here is a very old slide, but I think it illustrates quite nicely the patterning of information. So the eye works like a camera. So it's going to work on expansion and different angles that you have available to you. So this particular example is a ball being kicked in the center of the pitch. These are different time points. This is the unfolding trajectory of that ball with no spin. This one here, is clockwise spin, and the next one is counterclockwise spin. Same departure point, same arrival point, but three very different patterns of information. That's what the brain uses to make decisions. So you can see how a ball with spin is going to be much more difficult for the player to anticipate. So why use virtual reality? What is this technology? Well, from my point of view, remember the perception action piece. What I can actually do is simulate the perceptual input, primarily through what they see, but also what they hear. That's the input that the brain has to make those decisions. And then with the sensors that are attached to the body, what I'm able to do is measure that neural response or the output from the brain. So I preserve the perception action piece. And then it's through the analysis of this that I'm really able to understand something about performance. Why is this important? Because it gives us context. I see so many different technologies here today, and a lot of it's about the action piece. There's very little or next to no technologies that tell us something about the perception piece. And that ultimately drives the action. So I think when we're using technology, it's very important to think about that. So basically, I wanted to understand what is it about the ball flight that's causing that player to move to the left and then go, oh dear, it's coming right. So that analysis of the action or recording of the action tells me something about the decision making. So this is very old VR tech. So this was 10 years ago, and this was us in the lab in Belfast in Northern Ireland. So the graphics are a bit dodgy, but it was a good technology for me to be able to study what was going on in the brain. This is what the technology looked like then, a backpack on the back. You were tethered to a computer, and you could only move quite small distances. But what I was measuring was this relative movement of each of these players. How does the perception guide the action output? And I think this is quite a nice example because even just observing the movement of the players, it's very clear to see who the actual goalkeeper in this actually was. So it's showing you how the perception information influences the action. So in terms of our results, not at all surprising that our experts are better. But for me, the question is, why? What do they do differently to end up saving more shots? So this is a little bit sciencey, forgive me for that, but I want to show how information influences movement. So for this ball departure position here, the orange balls bend to the left, the pink to the right, and the blue are balls with no spin. These are balls arriving at the center point here. And what we were measuring is the lateral movement of left and right of the hands. So for the blue balls are coming straight at you, what the player just needs to do is raise the hands to stop it. So there should be no lateral deviation. And for the blue, there isn't. They go straight up. But look what happens with the orange. There's a bit like what we saw in the video. There's the moving in the direction of the ball and then realizing and having to correct, which leads to error at the end. You've got the opposite effect on the other side. And what actually we found was that the expert who waits longer and moves less in the wrong direction, which leads to less final error. And this is the example that I just showed you. So you see less final error, which means that they save the ball more. So that analysis of action tells you something about the whole decision making. So from a theoretical point of view, Yes, you've got your perception action, but this is unique to every single individual. Why? Well, because each individual has their own specific action capabilities. And by action capabilities, I mean what that individual can do. It will be determined by their size, it will be determined by their technique, it will be determined by their skill, it will be determined by their experience. They also have to be able to detect the information, read the ball trajectory, and that obviously comes through experience. I compare this to like a radio that has to tune into a specific frequency. You have to tune in to the information. So for me, that decision-making process is made up of those components there. So what does the science tell us about goalkeeping? So I wanted to bring a little bit of science here today and share with you what it is we actually know. Number one, I mentioned earlier, goalkeepers wait more than the expert goalkeepers wait that bit longer than the non-experts. We're all told faster reaction times is the way to go. We even see technologies that will train reaction time. But that, for me, is something we really don't want to do. Here's an example from the Premier League last year. As the ball leaves this player's foot, 40 milliseconds later, De Gea has moved left. He wasn't wrong. The initial ball heading direction was there. But there was spin on the ball, it starts to bend round, and he realizes he's moved in the wrong way. This is an example of like a trigger response, a really fast reaction time that actually led to a mistake. He had over a second for the ball to come here. He's the skill, he's the ability. He could have waited longer and he could have made a better decision. So for me, technologies like this, one has to be very careful. This is stimulus response. This is not what happens on the pitch. On the pitch, you're observing, you're watching, and you're anticipating. You're trying to take those patterns of information to anticipate where that ball is going to go. Brand new research that with my colleagues at Queen's University in Belfast, we've just completed. The wall can actually negatively impact on performance. Why do we put a defensive wall in? Does it really help the goalkeeper? Well, with our technology, what we were able to do was systematically control examples of a ball trajectory where there was a defensive wall and ball trajectories where there was no defensive wall. And what we find is that our experts were 10% less successful at stopping the ball with the wall than without a wall. Why? Because they had less information. They weren't able to see the departure of the ball. They weren't able to make that decision early enough and end up moving in often too late. Here I thought was quite a nice example of a big wall. This was in the World Cup last year, or 2 years ago. You've got Croatia, who put 6 men in the defensive wall. The English put some more in here, and the Croatians add more still. Look at that wall of players. Look at the goalkeeper, trying to see where on earth is that ball, who is going to kick the ball, when is the ball going to go. And of course, it leads to the first goal as well. There we go. So there you go, back of the net. So again, an example where the visual information is extremely important and where that wall could actually hinder performance. So another finding that we have, and this is really interesting because my very original work I did around the Roberto Carlos free kick was done in collaboration with Adidas Innovation Team Football, Roland Seidel. At the time they were making the Predator soccer boot, which allowed you to put more spin on the ball. So they were very interested in that question. Is spin on the ball more difficult to read? If so, why? But they came back to me in 2010, 2011, after the Jabulani ball, and basically said to me, Cathy, we've got a problem. Nobody liked that ball. They said that ball fluttered, it moved. We think actually the footballers maybe are just making a mountain out of a molehill. Can you please use your technology to tell us if it's the graphics on the ball, or if it's the flutter on the ball, or if it's a combination of both. So again, I was able to systematically control what the players saw. This time I didn't use goalkeepers, I used outfield players. And I just asked them to move to chest down the ball. So if you have to move to chest down the ball, you're going to have to read where that trajectory is actually going. So they gave me examples of flutter, and they gave me examples of different ball designs. And what we were able to do in our technology was recreate those and then measure the effects of those changes in ball design on the actual performance of the players. And thankfully, since things have been a little bit better. And the last piece of information I want to share with you, and this is brand new research that's come out of Spain and Portugal with some of colleagues I know, penalty saves are not all guesswork. So what they found by analysing lots of different penalties was, yes, the decision to go left or right, so the horizontal movement is made just before ball contact, or at that moment of ball contact and impact. So they do go right, left or right. That is the decision they do make, and they have to make that very early. However, what they did find was that goalkeepers can adjust the vertical component of the save, and we see a nice example here after the ball's coming. So they still do rely on ball flight information to pull off some of those wondrous saves at the very end. So I just wanted to share some of those findings from the scientific field about what the science says about goalkeeping and decision making. So more on to incisive and more on to how do we actually use VR technology. Well, before I talked about perception action, and if you think about the VR technology, it's a perfect way to preserve the perception action loop. So that's why I find this technology really interesting and one that I think is ripe for exploitation. I showed you the examples before of this backpack tethered to the screen, but as you can see now over there, but also here, you're wireless, you're free to move, your movements are much more realistic, the amplitude of the movement is much more realistic. So that allows us to probe the brain in new ways. So what we've really done with Clean Sheet, which is what we've got to demonstrate here today, is really control the VR input, so we can create lots of different types of shots and scenarios, measure the decision output through the sensors, and then present our information through our dashboard. So this is just a little video. So as you can see, we've got an example of players diving, moving around, so they're no longer tethered to the screen. We've got our connection to the computer, we can create different sessions, different types of drills, or the trainer themselves can create their own drills. We're able to work on footwork, work on technique, and very importantly, we've got that data that tells us something about performance. We can give players the option to redo a kick that they maybe just missed before, that they can develop the motor memory or the muscle memory to know how they should move in the future. So we see different ways of using this technology. I suppose the first thing, and this is I suppose where I think the technology can add value, is you can do things with the technology that you can't do in real life. One thing that I observed from the goalkeeping session this morning was the quality of ball service. So if you're trying to understand who is your best goalkeeper and you can't give them good quality ball service, how can you understand what the difference between your goalkeepers are? What we can do is give every single goalkeeper exactly the same test. We can vary the level of shot difficulty, so we can vary the speed, the power, the arrival position, the amount of spin on the ball. But very importantly, through our analysis, we can identify strengths and weaknesses such as biases left and right, speed of movement, ability to read the trajectory. That can allow us to benchmark performance, compare players, but also track progress over time. So this is just an example of the dashboard. Apologies, it's a little bit small. So this is for one particular shot that they saved with the left hand. And this was just to highlight one of our metrics, which is down here, which is movement efficiency. That's really the ability to read the ball trajectory and anticipate where it's going to go. So what we see with this ball that's got spin on it is they missed it the first time. The second time they got the left hand to it, but it ricocheted into the net. But the third time they actually made the save. And what you notice in the efficiency is, of course, they didn't get there in the first time. The second time they read it not too far, but the third time they read it much better, so their efficiency went up. This next example is a ball that was a bit faster. There was no spin on this ball, and it took the player 5 attempts to be able to stop this ball. And the coach who was using the technology at the time identified a problem with their technique. He identified their feet were too far apart and that they weren't moving as fast as they should. So for the first shot, he was moving at 2.7 meters a second, and he had an error of 1 meter 36. So he was quite far away from the ball. Michael said to the goalkeeper, "You need to narrow your base of support and move faster." So essentially that's what he did over the next 5 shots. He got progressively faster until he hit 4 meters a second and was able to pull off that save in the bottom left-hand corner. So what we can actually do with the technology is not only profile those strengths and weaknesses, we can also manipulate what we call the task constraints. So as a coach, you're always looking for those ways to test the player, to give them the opportunities to practice. So you can practice until you get it perfect with the redo function, and then it's very important that that muscle memory is maintained and you have the opportunity to take it out onto the real field as well. You can accelerate learning, but also that instant feedback is so powerful in learning. So what you can do is you can be immersed in the virtual reality. You can then say to the player, okay, let's replay that and show you what you just did. So you can step out of your position as goalkeeper in the VR and then see yourself as an avatar redoing the shot. We also have a replay feature on our dashboard as well. So from a coaching perspective, what you're really able to do with the session planner is manipulate those task constraints. So you're really able to manipulate the perceptual information and see how the organism and the environment really responds in terms of the action. Finally, the third and final place where we see it bringing value or adding value is protecting players. So this also comes from other sports. Often you don't want your outfield players taking lots of kicks, but you still want to give your goalkeepers practice. So you can minimize the risk to outfield players by giving them opportunities to practice without the physical strain. You can also give injured goalkeepers the opportunity to practice. So we had a goalkeeper who had broken his wrist. He was able to come in, practice still, and keep match sharp, even though he couldn't make those saves. So what's next? So Clean Sheet's our first product to market. We're delighted to be here today because this is our first convention. This is us literally starting on our journey of getting the technology out there. But we've got lots of plans where we can see where this could also add value in other areas. So if you think about it, we have a platform. It's a VR environment and sensors, where that VR environment could be anything you want it to be. We've got our decision analytics, the engine in behind that feeds off all the code and analyzes it. And then it's about interpreting that and presenting it in terms of the data. What I see as important is developing this concept of action intelligence, or AQ, through the main fundamental pillars of movement, which are balance, interception, rhythmic coordination, force control, and manual dexterity. So we can use VR to start to pull out and understand where somebody's basic fundamental movements are along these spectrum here. But I suppose something that's quite exciting for us is we were approached by the Scottish Rugby Union in the UK, who is very concerned about player well-being and the problems of concussion. And I know for soccer as well, it's also a big area of concern, particularly female concussions, that we really don't understand very well, why female brain seems to respond differently to concussion than the male brain. But if we look at the science behind it, what we realize is with concussion, we've got neurophysiological dysfunction that can cause all these different symptoms and factors to emerge. And what the research has shown, that these symptoms actually lead to dysregulated perception action. So that ability to pick up and use information and couple it together gives this increased behavioural risk. And I suppose hot off the press as well is this relationship between increased risk of musculoskeletal injury and the lack of perception action coupling. So there's something happening in the neural pathways between the sensory motor integration that's affected by the traumatic brain injury caused through concussion. And I think this is really interesting, and I've heard this from several sports, that a player returning from concussion can often suffer an ACL injury or an ankle injury afterwards, nothing to do with the concussion, but something to do with the body's ability to protect itself. And finally, this notion of perception, action, and the whole coupling of this, more and more research is suggesting this could be a biomarker for concussion. So that's what we're really going to start to work on next, and we've got James demonstrating this lovely here. So this is the type of thing you can do. You can push the perception system to the limit. You can look at different coloured balls, different types of trajectories. You can also then look at balance. You can take things like the star excursion balance test. You can make a virtual version of this. But the very interesting thing is you can precisely measure posture through the center of gravity measure we're able to extract from our different sensors. You can then jazz up the rehab piece. You can perturb the visual system a bit by having moving water, and then you can be encouraging them to make these functional movements or goal-directed movements in these types of environments. You can add in some sort of static dynamic balance tests, add in a bit of cognitive load to really stress the system. So at Incisive, we're really excited about the future. This is my brilliant team. Two of them are over there. There's Adrian and James, but we've also got Farsad and Tazi back in Belfast, helping us bring this technology and this platform to life. I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. And if you want to chat more, we'll be over at the booth, and we hope to see you also. Thank you.